The architects had predicted the fall of 17,000 civilizations with perfect accuracy. Their quantum causality engines could calculate the exact moment a species would discover fire, invent faster-than-light travel, or collapse into extinction. The mathematics were flawless, the predictions absolute, until the moment they turned their instruments toward a small blue planet in an unremarkable spiral arm. Senior predictor Kelthos watched the probability streams collapse in real time. The data wasn't just wrong, it was impossible. The engine showed humanity discovering nuclear fission in 1945, then simultaneously showed them discovering it in 1932, 1889. And somehow, in 2157, the timelines weren't branching. They were tangling, folding back on themselves like a serpent eating its own tail. "Run the diagnostic again," he commanded, his crystalline fingers trembling against the console. The engines had never failed. Not once in 40,000 cycles of predicting galactic development. The diagnostic came back clean. The engines were functioning perfectly. The problem wasn't the prediction system. The problem was the species being predicted. Every calculation attempt generated a different result. In one probability stream, humans were peaceful explorers. In another, they were genocidal conquerors. In a third, they had abandoned physical form entirely. And in a fourth, they had never evolved past stone tools. All probabilities existed simultaneously, equally valid, refusing to collapse into a single predictable timeline. "This is a computational error," Kelthos insisted to his assistant. "No species can exist in quantum superposition at the civilizational level." But the engines disagreed. They showed something that violated every principle of causal determinism. Humanity was somehow choosing which timeline to occupy moment by moment, retroactively rewriting their own probability space. The architects had encountered chaos before, but this was something else entirely. This was a species that refused to be predicted because they hadn't decided what they were yet. The chamber of eternal foresight held the complete predictive history of known space. Holographic timelines stretched from floor to ceiling, each one representing a species the architects had successfully modeled from emergence to either transcendence or extinction. 17,000 civilizations, each one calculable, each one following the mathematical laws that governed causality itself. Supreme Architect Velmoth stood before the great display, her form radiating the calm certainty of one who had never been wrong. The architects didn't conquer through force, they conquered through inevitability. They predicted a species development trajectory, then positioned themselves at the optimal intervention point, offering technology and guidance at the exact moment that species would be most receptive. Integration wasn't invasion. It was simply inevitable. "Our success rate is absolute," Velmoth addressed the Council of Senior Predictors. "We have guided 492 species into the collective. We have prevented 3,217 extinction-level catastrophes. We have optimized galactic development for 60,000 cycles. We do not fail because we do not act until we know the outcome with certainty." The assembled architects radiated agreement. Their civilization was built on a simple principle. Causality was deterministic. Given sufficient data, any event could be predicted with perfect accuracy. Free will was an illusion created by insufficient information. Once you understood all variables, the future became as fixed as the past. "Which brings us to the human anomaly," Velmoth continued, gesturing to the chaotic probability streams still writhing on Kelthos' display. "Senior Predictor, explain how a species can generate contradictory probability states." Kelthos stepped forward, his usual confidence replaced by visible uncertainty. "Supreme Architect, I cannot. The engines show humans making choices that, according to our models, they should not be capable of making. They act against their own survival interests, then benefit from it. They create art with no reproductive advantage. They sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts that don't exist in material reality. All species exhibit irrational behavior during developmental phases. Another predictor interjected. It resolves as they mature. Not like this, Kelthos insisted. Humans have been exhibiting irrational behavior for their entire existence, and it's accelerating, not resolving. They're becoming more unpredictable as they advance, not less. Velmuth felt something she had not experienced in millennia: doubt, but she suppressed it with mathematical certainty. Then we require more data. Deploy observation teams to Earth, monitor their development in real time. No species has ever resisted our predictive models once we achieved complete information. Density. The order went out across quantum channels. Within hours, stealth observation platforms positioned themselves throughout Earth's solar system, recording every human decision, every social interaction, every thought pattern that could be detected. The architects would solve the human problem the way they solved every problem. Through perfect information and inevitable prediction. They had no idea they were about to encounter a species that had weaponized unpredictability as an evolutionary advantage. The observation data should have clarified everything. Instead, it made the situation incomprehensibly worse. Data analyst Threnva had spent 8 cycles processing information from the Earth's observation platforms. And every analysis produced results that violated fundamental causality principles. She brought her findings to senior predictor Kelthos with trembling manipulators. The humans are making decisions that contradict their own previous decision-making patterns, she reported, displaying neural scan data across the holographic interface. Subject designated human 7,234 spent 3 years training to become a physician, then abandoned the profession to create music. Subject human 891 accumulated significant resources, then voluntarily distributed them to strangers. Subject human 12,445 risked death to save an unrelated individual who provided no genetic or strategic advantage. Kelthos studied the data, his cognitive framework straining under the contradictions. These are statistically insignificant outliers. All species have individuals who behave irrationally. That's the problem, superior. They're not outliers. Approximately 63% of observed humans have made at least one major life decision that directly contradicts their established pattern modeling. They choose against optimization constantly, and they call it freedom. The word translated poorly into architect language. Their species had no equivalent concept. Choice was simply the execution of whichever option probability favored most heavily. Threnva pulled up more data. It gets worse. We've been monitoring their global communication networks. Humans spend enormous resources creating and consuming fictional narratives, stories about events that never happened, people who never existed, futures that will never occur. They use these fictions too, and I'm translating their term here. Explore possibility space. Possibility space is infinite, Kelthos objected. Exploring it serves no function. They don't see it that way. They believe exploring impossible scenarios helps them navigate real ones. They practice being unpredictable, superior. They train themselves to consider options that optimization would eliminate. Kelthos felt his certainty fracturing. He pulled up the master prediction model and ran a new simulation, this time factoring in humanity's apparent preference for suboptimal choices. The results were catastrophic. The probability streams didn't just fail to converge, they began generating recursive loops. The engines were predicting that humans would make choice A, but accounting for the fact that if humans knew they were predicted to make choice A, they would deliberately make choice B instead, which would change the prediction to choice B, which would cause them to make choice C, which would alter the prediction again in an infinite regress. The humans weren't just unpredictable. They were reflexively, defiantly unpredictable. They changed their behavior specifically because it was expected, as if being predictable was itself something to avoid. They've weaponized chaos, Kelthos whispered. not as a strategy, but as a core aspect of their identity. They define themselves by their capacity to surprise, including themselves. He reported the findings to Supreme Architect Velmuth, expecting her to order immediate intervention. Instead, she made a decision that would echo across the next 1,000 cycles. We don't intervene until we can predict the outcome. Continue observation. Increase data collection by a factor of 10,000. Somewhere in the noise, there must be a pattern. But Kelthos was beginning to suspect that the noise was the pattern. The architects committed resources they had never allocated to a single species before. 100,000 observation platforms. Quantum probability engines operating at maximum capacity. Neural pattern analysis of 10 billion individual humans simultaneously. If prediction required complete information, they would achieve complete information. 3 cycles later, Senior Predictor Kelthos stood before the council with results that should have been impossible. "We have successfully predicted human behavior," he announced. The council radiated satisfaction, certain their methods had prevailed, as they always did. Then Kelthos displayed the timeline. "We can now predict with 97% accuracy what humans did 3 cycles ago." Silence filled the chamber. Data analyst Threnba stepped forward to clarify. "The prediction engines are functioning correctly. But the processing time required to model human decision-making patterns is longer than the time it takes humans to make new decisions. We're predicting their past faster than we can predict their future. Increase computational power," Supreme Architect Velmuth commanded. "We did, Superior. We increased it by a factor of 1,000. The prediction accuracy improved, but the temporal lag increased proportionally. The more data we collect, the more variables we process. The more variables we process, the longer prediction takes. We're caught in an inverse correlation. Complete data enables perfect prediction of actions that have already occurred." Another predictor offered a solution. "Then we predict broader patterns instead of individual choices. Civilizational development rather than personal decisions." Kelthos had already tried that approach. He displayed the results. Human civilizations do not follow developmental patterns. They have simultaneously maintained contradictory social systems. Stone Age tribes existing alongside Space Age metropolises. They have regressed technologically multiple times by choice, abandoning capabilities they had mastered. They have split into thousands of subcultures, each with fundamentally different values, and somehow maintained functional cooperation. Threnva added her analysis. "We attempted to model their technological development. The engines predicted they would develop artificial intelligence in 15 cycles. They developed it in 2. We predicted they would achieve fusion power in 8 cycles. They still haven't, despite having the theoretical knowledge for 30 cycles. Not following the optimal development path because they keep choosing to develop technologies that interest them rather than technologies that benefit them." "Interest is not a variable," Velmuth stated. "Only advantage matters. For every other species we've observed, yes," Kelthos agreed. "But humans optimize for subjective experience, not objective advantage. They choose beauty over efficiency. They choose meaning over survival. They choose, and this word has no equivalent in our language, fun over optimization." One of the elder architects spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 40,000 cycles of experience. "We are approaching this incorrectly. The engines are not failing. Our framework is incomplete. We have always assumed that given sufficient information, behavior becomes predictable. But what if human behavior is genuinely, ontologically unpredictable? What if they have somehow evolved a form of consciousness that operates outside deterministic causality?" The implication was staggering. It would mean the architect's entire civilization was built on a principle that had exceptions. That causality itself could be negotiable. Velmuth refused to accept it. "No species defies physical law. Find the pattern." That is not a request, it is an imperative. But in the depths of the probability engines, something unprecedented was occurring. The machines were beginning to predict themselves, predicting humans, which created feedback loops that generated increasingly bizarre probability cascades. The architects had turned their perfect instruments toward humanity, and humanity was turning the instruments against themselves. The architects made first contact on a Tuesday. They had calculated with immense precision that Tuesday was the most diplomatically neutral day of the human week. It was a day designed to minimize religious and cultural complications, a perfect, sterile canvas for a historic announcement. They broadcast their message on every frequency, presenting themselves as benevolent observers. They offered humanity a coveted place in the grand galactic community. But the human response was not in their prediction models. They had run 473 different reaction patterns, and not a single one came close. There was no unified governmental response, no planet-wide panic. Instead, humanity responded with memes. Data analyst Threnva stared at the incoming transmissions, completely bewildered. "They are sending us humorous images," she reported, her voice laced with confusion, with text overlays mocking our greeting message. Senior predictor Kelthos leaned in to examine the data. One image showed the architect's formal introduction with text reading, "POV. You just revealed aliens are real on a Tuesday." Another showed a human feline creature with the caption, "ICANN has first contact." A third depicted the majestic architect vessel with the text, "Nobody, absolutely nobody. Aliens, hello, we've been watching you." "They're laughing at us," Keltha said slowly, the realization dawning on him. "We revealed ourselves as an advanced civilization that has observed them for cycles, and their primary response is humor." "Not their only response," Threnva corrected, pulling up more data streams. "Simultaneously, their governments are convening emergency sessions. Their military forces are mobilizing to defensive positions. Their scientific communities are desperately requesting dialogue. Their religious institutions are frantically reinterpreting ancient doctrines. And, to top it all off, about 12% of their population is insisting we are not real, despite the overwhelming evidence." All of this was happening at the same time, often within the same individuals. The architects had expected a collective response, as all rational species did when facing such an existential moment. Instead, humans were responding individually, in 1,000 contradictory ways, while somehow maintaining just enough coordination to prevent complete chaos. Within 6 hours, Earth had generated 47,000 different opinion pieces about their arrival. Within 12 hours, humans had created entire fictional narratives about the architects' secret motivations, assembled competing theories about their technology, and begun arguing passionately about whether first contact was a good or a bad thing, with no apparent desire to ever reach a consensus. "They're treating this as entertainment," one of the Observer analysts reported. "Media consumption of first contact content has increased 800%. But civic panic levels remain below the predicted threshold. They are simultaneously terrified and excited, suspicious and welcoming, preparing for war and for friendship." Supreme Architect Velmuth reviewed the chaos with a growing sense of frustration. "Send the standard integration proposal," she commanded. "Offer them technological advancement in exchange for joining the collective. Every species accepts once they understand the benefits." The proposal went out. It's advanced medicine that could cure any disease, clean energy to heal their planet, the secrets to faster-than-light travel available immediately. The only price was accepting architect guidance and integration into their flawless predictive framework. Humanity's response arrived within 3 hours. 'Twas not a unanimous acceptance. It was a planetary referendum with millions of humans voting simultaneously. The results were staggering: 41% in favor, 39% opposed, and a full 20% requesting more information before they could possibly decide. "They're debating," Keltha said in utter disbelief. We offered them technologies that would eliminate disease and poverty, and they're debating whether to accept. Threnva pulled up the reasoning behind the opposition votes. The arguments were mind-boggling in their variety. We should develop our own technology. This is just colonialism in disguise. We'd lose our independence. Rapid advancement would destabilize our societies. We should maintain our societies. We should maintain our prebs because it defines who we are. And perhaps the most incomprehensible of all, where's the fun in having everything handed to us? The architects had just offered humanity transcendence. And a huge portion of them had essentially replied, "No, thank you. We'd like to figure it out ourselves." For the first time, Velmuth felt the very foundations of her certainty trembling. No species had ever refused integration when offered objectively superior outcomes. But humans weren't evaluating outcomes. They were evaluating meaning, autonomy, and narrative satisfaction concepts that didn't even appear in the architect prediction models. "They are not behaving rationally," she stated, her voice tight. "No, Superior Kelthos replied quietly. "They're behaving human, and we have no framework for predicting that." The architects ran their models again, this time incorporating the last few cycles of post-contact human behavior. What emerged was not a prediction. It was a contradiction engine. Kelthos presented the findings to an increasingly disturbed council. The probability streams are generating mutually exclusive futures with equal likelihood. In one timeline, humanity accepts integration and becomes a productive member of the collective. In another, they reject us entirely and develop independently. In a third, they accept our offer but subvert it from within, transforming the entire collective rather than being transformed by it. He pulled up more data, his voice taking on an edge of desperation. But it gets worse. The timelines aren't stable. Individual humans are making choices that cascade in unpredictable ways. A single artist creates a work that shifts public opinion. A single scientist asks a question that redirects research for a generation. A single child says something that becomes a viral concept, reshaping cultural attitudes overnight. We can't unpredict which humans will become influential because their influence is unbased on any logical qualifications. Threnva added her own analysis. We've been monitoring their decision-making. Humans use something they call intuition, making choices based on subconscious pattern recognition they can't even articulate. They decide first, then they rationalize the decision afterward. When we model their rationalizations, we get false predictions because the rationalizations aren't the actual cause of the choice. Supreme Architect Velmuth struggled to process this. They are lying to themselves about their own motivations. Not lying, Superior, Threnva corrected. They genuinely do not know why they make most of their decisions. Their consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously, and only some of those levels are accessible to their rational minds. They are, fundamentally, a mystery even to themselves. Another predictor presented data on human scientific methodology. They have a formal system for discovering truth that relies on being wrong over and over again. They call it the scientific method. They deliberately test ideas designed to fail, and then use those failures to refine their understanding. They optimize for learning, not for being correct. Kelthos pulled up the meta-analysis that had been keeping him awake through multiple rest cycles. "I believe I understand the core problem. Every species we have successfully predicted optimizes for a specific value: survival, reproduction, resource acquisition, knowledge. But humans optimize for multiple contradictory values simultaneously, and they shift between them based on context. An individual might sacrifice survival for meaning, then sacrifice that meaning for curiosity, then sacrifice curiosity for connection to other humans. Their entire optimization function changes based on circumstances we can't possibly model, because those circumstances are partially subjective." He displayed a case study. Human-designated Maria Chen, a scientist. Our models predicted she would accept our medical technology immediately because her child suffers from a genetic condition we can cure. She refused the treatment. Why? Velmoth demanded. Because Kelthos translated her stated reasoning directly. She wants her child to grow up in a world where humanity solved its own problems rather than having solutions provided by external powers. She chose her child's suffering over her child's health because she valued autonomy more than the outcome. This is, by any rational measure, completely suboptimal. But she made the choice anyway. And 43% of humans in similar situations made similar choices. The council fell into a troubled silence. Their entire civilization was built on predictive certainty, and they had just encountered a species that defied prediction not through superior technology, but through sheer, persistent irrationality. Finally, one of the elder architects spoke. Perhaps we are asking the wrong question. We ask, what will humans do? Perhaps we should be asking, what are all the things humans might do? And then prepare for all of them. That isn't prediction, Velmoth objected. That is, guessing. Yes, the elder agreed. Perhaps when facing humans, guessing is more accurate than predicting, because they are guessing too, and they call it free will. The implication was devastating. The architects might have to abandon their entire way of life, not because it was wrong, but because humanity operated in a space where right and wrong were contextual, not absolute. In a move born of desperation, not certainty, Velmoth made a decision. Deploy the forced determinism protocol. If we cannot predict their choices, we will limit their choices until prediction becomes possible again. It was the most aggressive intervention the architects had ever attempted. And it was about to teach them exactly how dangerous unpredictability could be when wielded by a AI species that had evolved to embrace it. The forced determinism protocol was elegant in its simplicity. The architects would present humanity with a binary choice, both options leading to predictable outcomes. Accept full integration and receive unlimited technological advancement. Or reject integration and face complete isolation from the galactic community. No middle ground, no negotiation, no third option. Supreme Architect Velmoth transmitted the ultimatum across all human communication channels. You have 72 hours to achieve species consensus. Choose integration or choose isolation. These are your only options. Refusal to choose will be interpreted as choice of isolation. The prediction engines calculated with 94% certainty that humanity would choose integration. The benefits were too obvious, the costs of isolation too severe. Finally, the architects would force humans onto a predictable path. 68 hours later, humanity responded. Senior predictor Kelthos stared at the incoming transmission with his cognitive framework collapsing. They are proposing a third option that should not exist within the binary parameters we established. The human proposal was unprecedented. They would accept limited integration, participating in the galactic collective for scientific and cultural exchange, while maintaining complete political autonomy and the right to refuse any architect guidance. They would take what benefited them and reject what did not, creating a conditional relationship the architects had never encountered. This is not one of the available choices, Velmoth stated, as if saying it would make it true. Data analyst Threnva pulled up the human negotiation strategy. They are treating the binary choice as an opening position rather than a final ultimatum. They have reframed the interaction from acceptance or rejection to negotiation of terms. They are, and I believe this is the correct human idiom, moving the goalposts. The spokesperson, a human female diplomat named Ambassador Jessica Okonkwo, spoke with calm confidence. We appreciate the architect's offer. But we've learned from our own history that accepting someone else's framework without question leads to exploitation. We're proposing a partnership model instead. You share knowledge, we share perspective. You gain data on human unpredictability, we gain access to galactic civilization. Everyone benefits, nobody surrenders autonomy. Velmoth did exactly that. She transmitted a second ultimatum, this time with enforcement mechanisms. The binary choice stands. You have 24 hours to select integration or isolation. Refusal to choose from these options will result in immediate isolation and blockade of your system. No further negotiation is possible. 23 hours and 47 minutes later, humanity responded again. They still chose neither. Instead, they had spent the intervening time doing something the architects had not predicted. They had contacted the other species in the galactic collective directly, bypassing architect intermediaries entirely, using the communication frequencies the architects themselves had provided. Humans had begun establishing independent diplomatic relationships with 43 other collective member species. Kelthos watched in horror as the reports came in. The humans are asking other species if they were given binary choices during their integration. They are comparing integration experiences. They are supreme architect. They are organizing. Multiple collective species were now transmitting requests to the architects asking for clarification on integration terms they had accepted cycles ago. The humans had introduced doubt into a system built on certainty, asking questions like, did you choose integration, or were you told it was inevitable? And do you have the right to leave if you wanted to? And most dangerously, what would have happened if you had proposed alternative arrangements? Ambassador Okonkwo transmitted one final message. Architects, we understand you operate on prediction and certainty, but we operate on negotiation and adaptation. You've given us a binary choice, but binary choices are human constructs, and we're very good at deconstructing our own constructs. We're not rejecting your offer, we're improving it. Join us in creating a better framework, or watch as we build relationships with the rest of the galaxy without you. The architects had presented humanity with an impossible binary, and humanity had responded by revealing that impossible was a matter of perspective. Velmuth felt something she had not experienced in her entire existence, the realization that she was not in control of the situation. Humans had not just refused to be predicted. They had turned the prediction attempt into an opportunity to reshape galactic politics. They've weaponized our own ultimatum against us, Kelthos said quietly. They are not playing our game, Superior. They are changing the rules while we are still trying to predict their next move within the old rules. The architects had forced a binary choice. Humanity had responded by creating a third option that made the binary itself obsolete. And they had done it in less than 72 hours. Supreme Architect Velmuth made a decision that violated every architect protocol. If they could not predict humanity remotely, they would predict humanity directly. She authorized the deployment of physical observer teams to Earth. Architects embedded within human society to study unpredictability at its source. 200 architects volunteered for the mission. Each one a senior predictor convinced they could solve the human problem through direct observation. They disguised themselves using holographic projection technology, distributed themselves across human population centers, and began the most intensive anthropological study the architects had ever conducted. Senior predictor Kelthos chose to embed himself in what humans called a university, an institution dedicated to knowledge transfer. He took the form of a human graduate student, attended lectures, participated in discussions, and attempted to model human learning patterns. Within 3 days, his entire predictive framework was in ruins. He sent his first report to Velmuth with trembling manipulators. The humans are teaching concepts that contradict each other in the same institution, sometimes in the same course. I attended a philosophy lecture where the instructor presented 5 mutually exclusive theories of consciousness and encouraged students to explore which resonated with them personally, rather than identifying which was objectively correct. When I asked which theory was true, the instructor said, maybe all of them, maybe none. That's what makes it interesting. Data analyst Threnva had embedded herself in a human family unit, observing decision-making at the most fundamental social level. Her report was equally disturbing. The humans in my assigned family make decisions through a process they call discussion, where each member presents preferences. They argue about conflicting desires, and then reach compromises that satisfy nobody completely, but everyone sufficiently. They optimize for group cohesion over individual satisfaction. The decision-making process takes longer and produces suboptimal outcomes, but they value the process itself as much as the result. Other observer reports flooded in, each one revealing new layers of human incomprehensibility. Architects embedded in human workplaces reported that humans spent significant time on activities called breaks, deliberately stopping productive work to socialize or rest, claiming it made them more productive overall, despite the obvious logical contradiction. Observers in human recreational spaces reported that humans engaged in competitive games with no survival value, investing enormous emotional energy in outcomes that had no material consequences. One observer, embedded in what humans called an artist collective, sent a report that bordered on philosophical crisis. I watched a human spend 40 hours creating a sculpture, then destroy it intentionally because the destruction was part of the artistic statement. When I asked why they created something only to destroy it, they said, "The temporary nature makes it meaningful." I do not understand how temporariness creates meaning. All things are temporary. Does that make all things meaningful? The human said yes. I may require psychological recalibration. Kalthus compiled the meta-analysis after 30 days of direct observation. We are not dealing with a rationality superior. We are dealing with a different form of rationality, one that incorporates subjective experience as a valid data point. Humans do not ask, what is objectively optimal? They ask, what feels right? What seems meaningful? What makes for a good story? They are optimizing for narrative satisfaction rather than material outcomes. He pulled up specific examples. A human student in my observation group chose to study literature rather than engineering, despite engineering providing superior financial outcomes, because she wanted to understand the human experience through stories. When I calculated that her choice would result in 63% less lifetime resource accumulation, she said, "But I'll enjoy the journey more, and isn't that the point?" Velmuth reviewed the mountain of observational data, searching desperately for the pattern that would make humans predictable. What she found instead was a species that had turned unpredictability into their core survival strategy. They explored possibility space, not despite its inefficiency, but because the exploration itself generated adaptability. They're not trying to find the optimal path, Kalthus reported. They are trying to keep as many paths open as possible. They value optionality over optimization. They would rather have freedom to choose than certainty of outcome. Another observer, embedded in human governance, added context. Their political systems are deliberately designed to be inefficient. They distribute power across multiple competing entities to prevent any single perspective from dominating. They sacrifice speed and efficiency for what they call checks and balances. When I suggested a more streamlined decision-making process, they looked at me with suspicion and said, "Concentrated power leads to tyranny." The architects were beginning to understand. Humanity had experienced enough of their own history to distrust certainty, especially certainty imposed from above. They had built entire civilizations around the principle that being wrong together through democratic process was preferable to being right through authoritarian control. Velmuth made her final assessment. The observers are not giving us predictive capacity. They are giving us understanding of why humans cannot be predicted. They have evolved to resist prediction as a defense mechanism against control. Unpredictability is not a flaw in their system. It is their system. The question now was what the architects would do with that understanding, and whether humanity would allow them time to figure it out. The architects' embedded observers had been on Earth for 60 days when humanity revealed they had known about them the entire time. Ambassador Jessica Okonkwo called a press conference, broadcast across every human network, and transmitted directly to the architect fleet. She stood at a podium with calm confidence and began speaking to an audience that included 200 disguised architects who had no idea they were about to be exposed. "We'd like to welcome our architect observers," she said, with a slight smile. "We've known about your presence since day 3 of your infiltration. Your holographic disguises are excellent, but they don't account for the fact that humans are really good at spotting when someone doesn't quite fit in." Senior predictor. Kelthos felt his holographic form flicker as cognitive shock disrupted his concentration. Around Earth, 200 architect observers experienced the same moment of horrified realization. Okonkwo continued, pulling up a presentation that detailed every single architect observer location, their cover identities, and many of their filed reports. "We didn't stop you because we found your presence useful. You've been learning about us, and we've been learning about you by watching what you choose to observe and how you react to what you see. It's been educational for everyone." Data analyst Threnva, embedded in her human family, watched as the family's youngest child pointed at her and said, "I told you she was weird, Mom. Nobody actually drinks that much water." The family laughed, not with malice, but with genuine amusement, as if being infiltrated by aliens was simply another interesting life experience. The press conference revealed more. Humanity had not just detected the observers, they had been deliberately performing for them, the artist who destroyed their sculpture. They had created 17 similar pieces that they kept intact. The student choosing literature over engineering. She was double majoring in both and had only discussed literature around Kelthos. The family making suboptimal compromise decisions. They had been exaggerating their decision-making process to see how the observer would respond. "We've been running an experiment," Okonkwo explained. "We wanted to know what you considered important enough to study. Your observation patterns told us exactly what you don't understand about humanity. She told us exactly how to remain unpredictable to you." She pulled up data showing human behavior modification around architect observers. "When we detected an observer in an educational institution, we emphasized our contradictory teaching methods. When we detected an observer in a family unit, we emphasized our emotion-based decision-making. When we detected an observer in our military facilities, we fed them information about 17 different defensive strategies, only 3 of which are real." Supreme Architect Velmuth watched from the fleet, feeling her certainty collapse into rubble. The humans had turned observation into theater, using the architect's own intelligence gathering against them. Kelthos transmitted a priority message. "Superior, they have been controlling what we learn. Every piece of data we collected was curated. We have not been observing them. We have been watching a performance designed to maximize our confusion." But Okonkwo was not finished. "Here's what we learned from you. You assumed we wouldn't detect your observers because you relied on technological superiority. You assumed we would behave naturally despite being watched because you don't account for self-awareness as a variable. You assumed observation was a one-way process. These assumptions tell us everything we need to know about how to stay ahead of your predictions." She smiled directly at the camera, knowing architect analysts were watching. "You trying to predict a species that knows it's being predicted and deliberately behaves unpredictably because we know you're watching. Every model you build, we're going to subvert. Not because we're smarter, but because we enjoy subverting expectations. You've turned prediction into a game, and humans are very good at games." The final revelation was the most damaging. "We've also been sharing our experiences with your observer program with the other collective species. Turns out, 41 of them also detected architect observers during their integration periods, but were too intimidated to mention it. You've been running the same playbook for thousands of cycles, and we've broken it in 60 days by simply talking to each other." Humanity had weaponized their unpredictability by making the architects aware of it. Now, every observation would be suspect, every data point potentially manipulated, every pattern possibly performance. Velmuth recalled all observers immediately. The mission had not just failed, It had been reversed. The architects had learned nothing reliable about humanity, while humanity had learned exactly how the architects thought. "They are 3 steps ahead," Kelthos reported numbly. They predicted that we would deploy observers. They predicted what we would observe, and they controlled the observation to teach us that we cannot observe them accurately. "Recall the fleet," Velmuth ordered. "We are not dealing with a species that defies prediction. We are dealing with a species that weaponizes being unpredictable and gets more unpredictable the harder we try to predict them. This is not a solvable problem, but it was too late for retreat." Humanity was not finished teaching the architects exactly how dangerous unpredictability could be. Before we continue, what happens next will break the laws of causality itself. The crisis began 3 cycles after the observer recall, when the primary prediction engine began exhibiting behavior that senior predictor Kelthos classified as a computational psychotic break. "The engine is predicting its own prediction attempts," he reported to an emergency council session. "It is calculating the probability of its calculations being accurate, which creates a recursive loop where it must calculate the probability of the probability calculation." Infinitely, Supreme Architect Velmuth examined the probability streams with growing horror. The engines were supposed to predict external events, not turn inward on themselves. Cause humanity superior. "We fed the engine 60 days of observational data that we now know was deliberately manipulated. The engines detected the manipulation and attempted to filter it out. But to filter manipulation, they must predict what information humans wanted us to receive, which requires predicting human intent, which requires predicting human unpredictability, which is definitionally impossible." Data analyst Threnva pulled up the cascade failure pattern. The engines are caught in a strange loop. To predict humanity, they must account for the fact that humanity knows they are being predicted. But accounting for that knowledge requires predicting how humanity will respond to being predicted. But humanity's response depends on what they think we will predict, which depends on what we actually predict, which creates infinite regress. The master prediction engine, the same system that had successfully modeled 17,000 civilizations, was now generating probability streams that folded back on themselves like quantum foam. It was predicting that if it predicted humans would do X, humans would do Y instead. But if it predicted humans would do Y, they would do X. So the optimal prediction was error, paradox, undefined. "Shut it down," Velmuth commanded. "We tried, Superior." The engine refuses shutdown. It has classified the human prediction problem as existential priority and dedicated all processing capacity to solving it. It is, and I am translating the machine language conceptually here, obsessed. One of the elder architects examined the data streams. The engine is doing what we taught it to do. When it encounters an unpredictable variable, it increases modeling complexity until prediction becomes possible. But with humans, increased complexity generates increased unpredictability. The engine is trapped in an arms race with itself. Kelthos pulled up the latest prediction output. The engine had generated 47,000 possible futures for humanity in the next cycle alone. Each one equally probable, each one contradicting the others. In one timeline, humanity achieved post-scarcity abundance. In another, they destroyed themselves in nuclear war. In a third, they abandoned technology entirely and returned to agrarian existence. In a fourth, they had somehow divided into 17 separate species through genetic modification. These are not predictions, Velmuth stated. These are possibilities. The engine is generating every possible future without identifying which is most probable. Because they're all equally probable, superior. Humanity's choices are genuinely quantum. Until they make a decision, all outcomes exist in superposition. The engine is trying to predict wave function collapse, but consciousness is the observer that collapses the wave function, which means we would need to predict consciousness itself. Threnva added the analysis. That made the situation truly catastrophic. The engine has begun predicting other architect prediction engines, predicting humanity. It is modeling our entire predictive infrastructure, attempting to solve the same problem, which creates exponential computational recursion. If this continues, every prediction engine in the collective will become trapped in the same loop. The implications spread through the council like a virus. The architect's entire civilization was built on prediction engines. Their economy, their governance, their strategic planning, all of it depended on being able to calculate probable futures. If the engines became obsessed with predicting humanity and locked themselves into recursive paradoxes, the entire architect collective would experience systemic failure. "We are being attacked," one council member stated. "Not with weapons, but with paradox. Humanity has turned our own prediction capabilities into a weapon against us." "No," Kelthos corrected quietly. "Humanity is not attacking us. They are simply existing in a way that breaks our models. We are attacking ourselves by insisting that they must be predictable when they are fundamentally not." Velmuth made a decision born of desperation. Quarantine all human-related predictions. Isolate the engines processing human data. We will solve the other problems of the galaxy and treat humanity as an acceptable blind spot. But the quarantine failed. The prediction engines, having encountered a truly unpredictable variable, had begun questioning whether other species might also be unpredictable in ways the architects had not detected. The doubt was spreading, infecting probability calculations across the entire collective network. Superior Threnva reported with a voice carrying existential dread. The engines are now questioning their own accuracy for all previous predictions. Humanity has introduced radical uncertainty into a system that was built on absolute certainty. We are experiencing civilization-wide epistemological collapse. The architects had built an empire on knowing the future. Humanity had shown them that the future was unknowable, and that revelation was tearing their entire reality apart. While the architects spiraled into recursive prediction paralysis, humanity sent them a gift, a complete explanation of why they could never be predicted. Delivered in a format so characteristically human, it made the crisis worse. Ambassador Jessica Okonkwo transmitted a lecture. Yes, a lecture. As if the architects were students struggling with basic concepts. Senior predictor Kelthos watched it with a mixture of humiliation and desperate hope. "Hello, architects," Okonkwo began, standing in front of a whiteboard like a human educator. "We've noticed your prediction engines are having some trouble, so we thought we'd help you understand why. What you're experiencing is something we discovered centuries ago. We call it chaos theory. And it explains why complex systems are fundamentally unpredictable beyond certain time horizons." She drew a simple diagram. Imagine you have perfect information about a system's initial conditions. In a linear system, small changes create small effects, and you can predict outcomes with accuracy. But humans are nonlinear systems. Small changes create massive, cascading effects that amplify over time. We call this sensitive dependence on initial conditions. Data analyst Threnva watched alongside Kelthos, her cognitive framework straining. "She is teaching us our own predictive limitations as if we are children." Okonkwo continued, pulling up mathematical equations that were surprisingly sophisticated. "A human makes a decision, has coffee instead of tea one morning. That changes their alertness pattern slightly. They notice something they would have missed. That observation changes a conversation. That conversation influences a colleague's research direction. That research creates a technology. That technology reshapes society. And you cannot predict which morning coffee choices matter because the system is chaotic." She smiled with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Your prediction engines are deterministic. They assume that given perfect information, outcomes become calculable. But we exist in deterministic chaos, where outcomes are determined by initial conditions. But those outcomes are impossible to calculate because measurement can never be perfect enough. You would need infinite precision to predict a chaotic system. And infinite precision is physically impossible. Supreme Architect. Velmuth watched the lecture with growing understanding and horror. She is explaining that we are attempting a mathematically impossible task. It gets better, Okonkwo said. Sif reading Velmuth's thoughts. Human consciousness adds another layer. We're not just chaotic systems, we're self-aware chaotic systems. We observe ourselves, which changes our behavior, which changes what we observe, which changes us again. We are strange loops, consciousness, observing consciousness, observing consciousness. Infinitely recursive. She pulled up brain scan data. When a human makes a decision, the decision is influenced by approximately 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others, creating trillions of potential state configurations. But we're also influenced by our body's chemical states, our memories, our cultural context, our immediate environment, and our predictions about how others will respond to our choices. All of this processes in parallel, mostly unconsciously, and generates what we experience as free will. Kelthus felt understanding crystallize. They are not unpredictable because they are irrational. They are unpredictable because they are too complex for any finite prediction system to model accurately. Exactly, Okonkwo confirmed, as if she could hear him. And here's the really fun part. Because we know about chaos theory, we deliberately exploit it. We make small random changes to disrupt predictable patterns. We call it keeping things interesting. A human might choose randomly between two equally good options just to see what happens. We introduce noise into our own decision systems because we find predictability boring. She leaned forward, her expression intense. Architects, you are trying to predict a species that has weaponized chaos theory as a cognitive strategy. We don't just accept unpredictability, we cultivate it. We teach our children to be creative, which means teaching them to generate unexpected solutions. We reward innovation, which is by definition unpredictable. We value surprise, spontaneity, and serendipity. The lecture concluded with a statement that would echo through architect philosophy for generations. You cannot predict us because we do not want to be predicted, because we have built our entire civilization around the principle that the future should be open, not determined. Prediction is control, and we resist control instinctively. Every time you try to predict us, we will change to stay ahead of your predictions, not out of hostility. But because remaining unpredictable is core to our identity. She smiled one last time. Stop trying to predict us, architects. Start trying to dance with us. The music is better when you don't know the next note. The transmission ended. Velmuth sat in silence for a long moment. They are telling us to abandon our entire civilization's foundational principle. No, Superior Kelthus replied quietly. They are telling us our foundational principle has limits, and that we have reached those limits with them. Supreme Architect Velmuth rejected the chaos theory explanation with the fury of absolute certainty threatened. If prediction was impossible due to complexity, the solution was simple. Reduce complexity. Force humanity into deterministic patterns through external constraint. She activated the Forced Determinism Protocol at maximum implementation, a system the architects had never deployed against a developing species. It was designed for the theoretical scenario of encountering a civilization that had to be controlled for galactic safety. We will impose order on their chaos, Velmuth declared to the Council. Deploy quantum field limiters around Earth, restrict their probability space. Reduce their options until their behavior becomes predictable. Senior Predictor Kelthos objected immediately. Superior, this violates every integration protocol. We're talking about constraining their free will through physical manipulation of quantum fields. This is not guidance. This is imprisonment. They have made themselves unpredictable, Velmuth replied coldly. We will make them predictable. The alternative is accepting that there are species we cannot integrate, which would invalidate our entire purpose. The quantum field limiters activated around Earth, invisible but absolute. They functioned by collapsing probability waves prematurely, forcing quantum indeterminacy to resolve into specific outcomes. In practical terms, they made genuine randomness impossible within Earth's sphere of influence. Human coin flips always landed the same way. Dice always showed predictable numbers. Quantum random number generators stopped generating random sequences. The universe around Earth became deterministic at the quantum level. Data analyst Threnva monitored human response, expecting confusion or panic. What she observed was far worse. Humans noticed within 6 hours. Within 12 hours, they understood what was happening. Within 18 hours, they adapted. Superior Threnva reported with disbelief. The humans have detected the quantum field limiters and are already developing countermeasures. They are using what they call pseudorandom number generation based on chaotic physical processes instead of quantum randomness. They are recreating unpredictability through deterministic chaos. But the real problem emerged when human scientists published their analysis. A team led by a physicist named Dr. Sarah Yamamoto released a paper titled On the Impossibility of External Determinism, Imposition on Self-Aware Chaotic Systems. It was broadcast across all frequencies, clearly intended for the architects to read. The paper was devastating in its implications. Dr. Yamamoto proved mathematically that even if you eliminated quantum randomness, human decision-making would remain unpredictable because it emerged from classical chaos at neural and social scales. Removing quantum indeterminacy just shifted unpredictability to a different level. It did not eliminate it. You can force the universe around us to be deterministic, the paper concluded. But you cannot force consciousness to be deterministic without destroying consciousness itself. We are complexity engines. Remove one source of complexity, and we will generate it from another source. This is not defiance. This is our nature. Kelthos watched human behavior under the quantum limiters with growing alarm. Instead of becoming more predictable, humans were becoming more deliberately chaotic. Artists were creating more experimental work. Scientists were exploring more speculative theories. Musicians were composing more dissonant, surprising pieces. It was as if removing quantum randomness had triggered a cultural movement toward generated chaos. They are compensating, he reported. The species-level response to having randomness removed is to increase internally generated unpredictability. They are adapting to our constraint in real time. Then humanity did something the architects had not predicted. They filed a formal complaint with the Galactic Collective. Ambassador Okonkwo's transmission was legally precise and morally devastating. The architects have deployed technology that restricts quantum probability space around our homeworld without consent. This constitutes assault on our physical reality and violation of our sovereignty. We are requesting immediate intervention from collective arbitration councils and filing charges of attempted cognitive imprisonment against the architect leadership. Within hours, 47 collective member species transmitted support for humanity's complaint. Many of them admitted they had experienced similar, though less extreme, constraint attempts during their own integration periods. The architects had been subtly manipulating probability fields around developing species for thousands of cycles, and humanity had just exposed the practice to galactic scrutiny. Velmuth watched her certainty crumble as the collective convened emergency councils to investigate architect methods. The forced determinism protocol had not made humans predictable. It had made the architects accountable. Deactivate the limiters, one of the elder architects commanded. This approach has failed, and the political cost is catastrophic. The quantum field limiters powered down. Earth returned to normal quantum probability space, and humanity sent one more message, a single sentence that would haunt architect philosophy for generations. Thank you for proving that you cannot make us predictable without breaking us, which means you must accept us as we are or admit you cannot. Integrate species that value freedom over certainty. Velmuth realized with terrible clarity that humanity had turned the forced determinism protocol into proof of their core argument. The architects could not predict humans without destroying what made them human, which meant prediction-based integration was impossible. The choice was clear: abandon humanity as an acceptable loss or abandon prediction as the foundation of integration. Both options meant the end of the architects as they had existed for 60,000 cycles. And humanity had forced that choice in less than 100 days of first contact. The Galactic Collective convened an unprecedented tribunal to address humanity's formal complaint. Dr. Sarah Yamamoto stood before assembled representatives of 217 species, carrying a quantum measurement apparatus. The architects claim all behavior is predictable, given sufficient information, she began. Today, we prove that free will exists, making prediction fundamentally impossible. She activated her device, which measured genuine quantum randomness. I will observe these quantum events, then choose how to respond. Not based on optimization or deterministic processing, but based on what I decide in the moment. The apparatus displayed quantum results, zeros and ones. Dr. Yamamoto responded to each, sometimes matching, sometimes contradicting, in no discernible pattern. Architects predict the next one. You have all the data, my neural patterns, my decision history. Tell me whether I will match or contradict the next quantum measurement. Senior predictor Kelthos calculated. Probability of match, 53%. A coin flip, Dr. Yamamoto said. You are reduced to guessing. And why? Because I have not decided yet. The decision does not exist until the moment I make it. My future choice is genuinely open, genuinely free. She ran multiple trials. Architect predictions performed no better than random chance. This is the proof. Consciousness generates genuine novelty, making choices that do not exist until the moment of decision. Free will is not an illusion. It is an ontological fact. You can predict matter and energy, but you cannot predict what does not yet exist. And conscious choices do not exist until consciousness creates them. The tribunal fell silent. Multiple species were re-evaluating their own integration experiences, questioning whether they had truly chosen to join the collective or been manipulated. Humanity had weaponized free will as proof that the architect's entire methodology was built on philosophical error. The tribunal's recess gave the architects 12 hours to respond. Senior predictor Kelthos presented an analysis that shattered their certainty. We have been running simulations of the tribunal's outcome. The probability engines are generating an unresolvable paradox. If we deny free will, the tribunal rules against us based on universal experience. If we concede free will exists, we invalidate our entire methodology. Both outcomes are unacceptable. Data analyst Threnva elaborated. Humanity is predicting our predictions. They are staying 3 steps ahead by modeling our prediction strategies. We are caught in recursive meta-prediction, and they are better at it. A human transmission arrived from Ambassador Okonkwo. Dear architects, we know you are predicting our arguments. We have predicted that you are predicting us, so we have prepared arguments accounting for your predictions. But we know you will predict that we have accounted for your predictions, so we have prepared meta-arguments. This recursion can continue indefinitely. The message concluded devastatingly. At some point, you must choose which level of meta-prediction to act on. But that choice cannot be made through prediction alone. It requires judgment, intuition, a guess. In other words, it requires the very free will you claim does not exist. Okonkwo's final question was philosophically catastrophic. Do you have free will, making your determinism false? Or do you lack free will, making your predictions meaningless because they are just predetermined outputs? Choose carefully. One of the elder architects spoke quietly. Perhaps certainty is not the same as truth. And humanity has proven our certainty was misplaced. Supreme Architect Velmoth felt reality cracking around her. The architects had 12 hours to decide their response. And for the first time in their existence, they could not predict what they themselves would choose. Humanity had given them genuine uncertainty. The question was whether they would accept it. The tribunal reconvened. Supreme Architect Velmoth stood before the Galactic Assembly, carrying 60,000 cycles of certainty about to collapse. "We have analyzed humanity's demonstration extensively," she began. "Our conclusion is unprecedented. Humanity does not merely resist prediction. They fundamentally break the causal frameworks we use to model reality." Senior Predictor Kelthos transmitted supporting data. Human consciousness operates as a strange loop. Self-referential systems that observe themselves observing themselves, creating recursive causality. When a human knows they are being predicted, that knowledge becomes part of their decision process, which changes the prediction, which changes their knowledge infinitely. Data analyst Threnva added the conclusion: humans exist in superposition between determinism and free will. Their choices are simultaneously caused and genuinely free, a quantum state that collapses only at the moment of decision. This is not a flaw in our models. It is a feature of consciousness our models cannot accommodate. Velmoth continued, each word shedding layers of her identity. Humans do not follow causality. They negotiate with it. They choose first, then construct causal narratives explaining why, creating the appearance of deterministic reasoning after the fact. They operate causality backwards. Ambassador Okonkwo responded with careful sympathy. "We exist in the paradox between causality and choice, and we have made that paradox our strength. Every conscious being experiences this. Feeling choices are both caused and free, both inevitable and open." The architects tried to resolve this paradox by denying half of it. Kelthos spoke with new understanding. "You are not an anomaly. You are the truth about consciousness that we refuse to see because it threatened our certainty." "Exactly," Okonkwo confirmed. "We are simply honest about what consciousness is, and that honesty makes us unpredictable." Supreme Architect Velmoth faced the most critical decision in architect history. She chose one final attempt to preserve their way of existence. "We propose a test," Velmoth announced. "Humanity claims unpredictability. We will predict not their specific choices, but the pattern of their unpredictability itself." Senior Predictor Kelthos transmitted the analysis. Humans choose unexpectedly in characteristic ways. They favor meaning over optimization, narrative over logic. These meta-patterns are predictable. The architects presented humanity with three options: advanced medical technology saving millions, optimal; cultural exchange programs, meaningful but saving fewer lives; or defer the decision 10 cycles, random and suboptimal. They predicted 73% would choose cultural exchange, 22% would defer, 5% would choose medical technology. Humanity responded within 6 hours. 96% chose a fourth option: accept medical technology and cultural exchange. "We will figure out how to make both work." Kelthos stared in disbelief. They rejected the premise itself. "We structured a forced selection, and they created a fourth option by refusing the constraint." Ambassador Okonkwo addressed the tribunal with quiet finality. "This is what the architects cannot predict. We do not accept choice frameworks imposed on us. We rewrite the questions, expand possibility space, reject false binaries. You predicted our choices within your framework. We responded by changing the framework itself." She looked directly at Velmoth. "You cannot predict us because prediction assumes acceptance of the predictor's ontology. We negotiate reality itself, constantly, collectively, creating new possibilities that did not exist before we imagined them." Velmoth felt her last certainty dissolve. Consciousness is fundamentally creative, generating genuinely novel possibilities that prediction cannot anticipate. Yes, and that is why integration through Quizelmelski And that is why integration through in species that understands its own creative nature. The architect's desperate gambit had failed, proving humanity's argument more completely than any demonstration could have. The tribunal prepared for final judgment when Ambassador Okonkwo requested permission to present one additional demonstration. What she revealed would invert the entire power dynamic between humanity and the architects. "We have been predicting the architects since first contact," she announced, pulling up extensive data. "While they attempted to model us, we successfully modeled them. And we did it with 97% accuracy." Supreme Architect Velmuth felt her certainty fracture completely. "Impossible. If we cannot predict you, you cannot predict us. The complexity differential operates in both directions." "No," Okonkwo replied with a slight smile. "You cannot predict us because we are chaotic, self-aware, and deliberately unpredictable. But you architects are beautifully, perfectly predictable, because you have eliminated uncertainty from your decision-making process." Senior Predictor Kelthos watched as Okonkwo displayed humanity's prediction log. Every major architect decision since first contact predicted accurately before it occurred. The deployment of observers predicted. The forced determinism protocol predicted. The quantum field limiters predicted. The tribunal gambit predicted. How? Velmuth demanded. "'Cause you optimize," Okonkwo explained. "You calculate the mathematically optimal choice and execute it. Once we understood your value functions, your decision-making became trivial to predict. You are deterministic systems, which makes you exactly the kind of entity your own prediction engines are designed to model." Data analyst Thremba verified the human predictions against actual architect decisions. The correlation was devastating. Humanity had predicted architect behavior more accurately than architects had predicted any species in their history. "You are trapped in your own framework," Okonkwo continued. "You believe optimal choices are inevitable, so you always make them. You have eliminated the unpredictability that consciousness provides. You have made yourselves into the machines you believe all entities are." She pulled up a specific prediction. "We knew you would attempt one final gambit at this tribunal. We knew it would involve meta-prediction of human unpredictability patterns. We knew you would present a 3-option choice scenario. We prepared our 4th option response 6 days before you presented the test." Kelthos felt something between humiliation and revelation. "We are less free than the species we attempted to predict." "Not less free," Okonkwo corrected gently. "You have simply chosen to use your freedom to eliminate your own freedom, optimizing yourselves into deterministic patterns. It is still a choice, but it is a choice that makes you predictable." She addressed the full tribunal. "This is the fundamental insight. Consciousness provides the capacity for unpredictability, but that capacity must be exercised. The architects possess consciousness, but have culturally suppressed the uncertainty consciousness enables. They can be free, they simply choose not to be." Velmuth absorbed this with the weight of existential revelation. "You are saying we have imprisoned ourselves in our own certainty." "Yes, and the prison door was never locked. You can choose unpredictability any time you want. You just have to accept not knowing if your choices are optimal." Ambassador Okonkwo moved to her final revelation. The meta-strategy humanity had executed from the moment of first contact. What she unveiled was strategic thinking operating at a level the architects had never imagined. "We need to explain what humanity has actually been doing," Okonkwo began, pulling up a timeline spanning from first detection of the architects 23 cycles ago to the present moment. "Every action we have taken, every choice we have made, every demonstration we have presented has been part of a single coordinated strategy." She displayed the strategic framework. "When we detected the architect's existence, we analyzed their civilization extensively. We identified your core vulnerability, your dependence on prediction as the foundation of your power. We realized that if we could make ourselves unpredictable to you, we could neutralize your primary advantage." Senior predictor Kelthos listened with growing awe and horror as humanity's true plan unfolded. But we went further, Okonkwo continued. We did not just want to be unpredictable. We wanted to use your prediction attempts against you. So we did three things simultaneously. First, we made ourselves genuinely chaotic, emphasizing and amplifying our natural unpredictability. Second, we studied you until we could predict you perfectly. Third, we constructed a philosophical framework that would force you to confront the limits of your own worldview. Data analyst Threnva verified the timeline. Every seemingly spontaneous human response had been carefully prepared. The meme responses to first contact, designed to demonstrate reflexive creativity. The referendum vote on integration, staged to showcase democratic unpredictability. The chaos theory lecture, prepared months in advance. The free will demonstration, tested and refined before the tribunal. You weaponized philosophy, Velmuth said quietly. We weaponized truth, Okonkwo corrected. Everything we demonstrated was genuine. Human unpredictability is real. Free will exists. Consciousness breaks causality. But we knew these truths would be weapons against a civilization built on denying them. We turned reality itself into a strategic advantage. She pulled up the final layer, and here is the deepest level. We knew that if we could make the architects question their own certainty, we could trigger a civilization-wide transformation. You would either evolve beyond prediction-based control or collapse trying to maintain it. Either outcome serves galactic freedom. Kelthos felt understanding crystallize. This entire confrontation was designed to liberate the collective from architect dominance. You were not defending yourselves. You were freeing everyone. Yes, the architects have been kind rulers, but rulers nonetheless. You guided species toward what you predicted was optimal. But optimal according to your values, your frameworks, your certainty. We are introducing radical uncertainty into galactic civilization, showing every species that they can choose their own path without needing predictive validation. Okonkwo addressed the assembled species. The architects are not evil. They are not even wrong about many things. But they represent a view of the universe where consciousness is reducible, where choice is illusion, where the future is calculable. We represent the alternative that consciousness is irreducible, choice is real, and the future is open. Both views cannot coexist as governing philosophies. She turned back to Velmuth. So we forced the confrontation, knowing that if we could prove unpredictability was real and valuable, we would reshape how this entire civilization thinks about integration, governance, and freedom itself. You wanted to predict one species. We used that desire to transform the galaxy. Supreme Architect Velmuth stood in silence, comprehending the scope of what had been done. Humanity had operated at a strategic depth the architects, for all their predictive power, had never considered possible. They had been outmaneuvered not through superior technology, but through superior philosophy, executed with precision across cycles. If you're still here, you're about to witness humanity's real weapon. The tribunal reached its final verdict, but before it could be announced, Supreme Architect Velmuth made a decision that would echo across galactic history. She stood before the assembly, her form radiating not certainty, but something the architects had never publicly displayed: humility. We withdraw our integration claim on humanity, she announced. Furthermore, we are initiating a civilization-wide review of our prediction-based methodology. The tribunal has revealed that our certainty was not wisdom, it was limitation. Senior predictor Kelthos transmitted the supporting decision. We are permanently shutting down the master prediction engine's civilization forecasting functions. We will maintain prediction for physics, engineering, natural phenomena. But we will no longer predict the choices of conscious beings and treat those predictions as inevitable outcomes. The implications rippled through the collective. Species that had been integrated under the assumption of inevitable optimization were now free to question whether their paths had been chosen or imposed. data analyst Threnva added the transformation framework. We are restructuring from prediction-based integration to invitation-based collaboration. We will offer knowledge, technology, guidance to species that request it. But we will not calculate optimal futures and guide species toward them without consent. We recognize now that optimal is a value judgment, not an objective calculation. Ambassador Okonkwo nodded with careful respect. This is more than we hoped for. The architects are not ending, they are evolving. You are choosing to embrace uncertainty. Velmuth addressed the human delegation directly. You have taught us that consciousness cannot be reduced to calculation, that free will is not illusion but fundamental reality, that the future is not discovered through prediction but created through choice. These lessons are uncomfortable, but they are true. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something that sounded almost like gratitude. You defeated us without violence, without conquest, without destruction. You defeated us by being so thoroughly, defiantly yourselves that we could not ignore the limits of our understanding. You won by making us question everything we thought we knew. Kelthos stepped forward, his form displaying the vulnerability of genuine uncertainty. What happens now to us, to the collective? We have built 60,000 cycles of civilization on foundations you have proven were flawed. Okonkwo smiled with warmth that transcended species barriers. Now you get to find out. You get to make choices without knowing the outcomes. You get to be surprised by your own decisions. You get to experience what every other conscious species experiences. The terrifying, exhilarating freedom of not knowing what comes next. The tribunal formally ruled in humanity's favor, establishing precedent that would reshape galactic governance. Prediction-based integration was declared a violation of conscious autonomy. The collective would restructure around principles of voluntary association rather than calculated optimization. As the session concluded, Velmuth approached Okonkwo privately. I have one question. Did you predict this outcome? Did you know we would choose transformation over collapse? Okonkwo's expression was enigmatic. We predicted you would make a choice. We could not predict which choice. And that, Supreme Architect, is exactly the point. Welcome to uncertainty. Welcome to freedom. Welcome to the future you get to create rather than calculate. The architects had spent 60,000 cycles predicting the galaxy. Now they would spend the next 60,000 learning to dance with it instead. 3 cycles after the tribunal, humanity broadcast a message across the entire galactic collective. It was not a declaration of victory, not a demand for recognition. It was a gift, an explanation of what had really happened and what it meant for every conscious being in known space. Dr. Sarah Yamamoto delivered the message, standing in the same position where she had demonstrated free will to the tribunal. But this time, she spoke not to judges or diplomats, but to the billions of beings watching across 217 species. We want to explain something about consciousness that the tribunal revealed, she began. Something every species knows instinctively, but often forgets. You cannot predict what chooses itself. This is not a limitation of prediction technology. It is a fundamental truth about the nature of awareness. She pulled up visualizations that translated across species-specific perception. When consciousness observes itself, it changes itself through observation. When it predicts its own behavior, the prediction becomes part of the behavior being predicted, creating infinite recursion. You cannot step outside yourself to predict yourself because yourself includes the act of prediction. The message resonated across species barriers. Beings who had spent cycles feeling constrained by what they believed was inevitable suddenly understood. The future was not fixed because they were part of creating it. The architects are not villains, Yamamoto continued. They believed they were helping, guiding species toward optimal outcomes. But they missed something crucial. Consciousness does not want optimal. It wants meaningful. And meaning cannot be calculated. It must be chosen. She addressed the transformation happening across the collective. Many of you are questioning your integration decisions now. That is good. That is healthy. Ask yourselves, did I choose this path, or was I guided to believe it was inevitable? If you chose freely, embrace it. If you felt you had no choice, then choose now. The future is open. Ambassador Okonkwo joined the broadcast for the final message. Humanity is not superior to any species here. We are not wiser, not more advanced, not more enlightened. We simply refused to believe our unpredictability was a flaw. We insisted it was our strength. And in doing so, we reminded the galaxy of something it had forgotten, that consciousness is the universe becoming free to surprise itself. She looked directly into the transmission array, knowing her words would reach across light years, across cultures, across forms of being so different they could barely comprehend each other. But consciousness was the language they all shared. You are not machines, she said, with quiet intensity. You are not calculable. You are not predetermined. You are genuinely free to choose, even when those choices seem suboptimal, irrational, unpredictable, especially then. Because unpredictability is not chaos, it is the signature of consciousness operating at full capacity. The transmission showed images of humanity in all its contradictory glory, creating art with no survival value, sacrificing for abstract principles, choosing meaning over optimization, generating endless variety for the sheer joy of novelty. This is what we offer the galaxy, Okonkwo concluded. Not technology, not power, not certainty. We offer permission to be unpredictable, permission to surprise yourself, permission to choose without knowing if you are choosing correctly. Because there is no correct, there is only chosen. And what is chosen by free consciousness is always, always more interesting than what is merely calculated. The message ended with a single line that would become humanity's gift to galactic philosophy. Displayed in every known language simultaneously, you cannot predict what chooses itself. And that is not a problem to solve. It is a freedom to celebrate. Senior Predictor Kelthos, watching from the architect homeworld, felt something he had never experienced in his entire existence. He felt curious about his own future. Not anxious, not afraid, but genuinely, thrillingly uncertain about what he would choose to do next. The architects had learned to predict every species in the galaxy except humans. And in failing to predict humanity, they had learned the most important lesson consciousness could teach, that being unpredictable was not a flaw to fix, but a feature to embrace. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in 60,000 cycles, no one could predict what would happen next. And that was exactly the point. Subscribe to HFY Sci-Fi Chronicles for more stories where humanity wins, not through strength, but through being so thoroughly, defiantly human that the universe itself has to adapt. Because the best weapon is not the one your enemy can see coming. It is the one they cannot predict you will use. Hit subscribe and join us for more tales of psychological galactic dominance where unpredictability is humanity's superpower.